Hello, lovely learners. Welcome back to ALifeLearned and to my first video of the year. I know it's been a bit. Sometimes it's hard to get yourself back into the swing of things. But anyways, I thought it would be interesting to make my first video of the year a compilation of the recent public participation meeting that happened at my local council. For those who aren't aware, the Ontario municipalities have been working over the last couple months to solidify their multi-year budgets for the next 4 years. And this is my first experience participating in that politically, but I learned that they do take our comments, not that it really mattered, but they do at these public participation meetings. So I followed along as they were moving through the budget and deciding what to keep and what to toss, basically. And as they moved through funding things that were most important to me, which is support for women facing women identifying people facing gender-based violence, I was really happy to see that that was basically fully funded in a lot of the different business cases they had. So I moved on to the next thing that I thought was really important and relatively unsupported, and that was the library. I spoke out to basically say that a lot of their arguments to not fund the library didn't make sense, and along with a lot of people within the community, I finished off by saying that I do believe a lot of the funding that could be going to the library or transit or a lot of other public services that we need is instead being squandered through an incredibly bloated police budget. There were, I'm going to say maybe about an hour of people commenting on either their specific support for a business case for a community service or in support of the police budget. And then there were about 3.5, 4 hours of people saying defund the police. Some of those people were saying that they support some form of funding for the police, but they specifically don't support the $600 million, and I am not exaggerating there, that the London Council has decided to designate to the police in addition to the budget increases they're already getting. And so considering the fact that other areas of our community are severely underfunded and did not get the asks that they put in for their budgets, namely the library and transit, well, and arts and culture as well, for that matter, like the Museum London has got super underfunded as well. That's where people are coming out saying, we don't agree with this. We don't agree with you giving so much money to the police when all of our other community services are so underfunded. These services are preventative measures to crime and safety. When you give people housing, when you give people a safe place to go like the library, when you give people transit and an ability to get around the city, they don't have the same motivations to commit crime. They have safety, they have wellness, they don't have to search out survival through crime. And so that argument was basically made over and over and over. We kept the council there for 6 hours. I'm sure they weren't too pleased about that. But we were really trying to make a point that this is incredibly important to us, that over half of the Londoners who came out that night did not agree with the council supporting such a huge budget for the police while underfunding so many other budgets within the community. There was some really vulnerable sharing, so FYI, there's a trigger warning coming because I thought it'd be interesting to make a compilation of all these different people speaking to defunding the police. I didn't want to get anybody waste anybody's time, so I tried to cut it down to an hour, which was difficult because there were some really great comments and really great speeches, but a lot of people were really repetitive, so I cut out a lot of the repetition and just kept some of the really strong highlights. But overall, you can hear from one person to the next that there's a lot of really vulnerable stories of being victimized by the local police department and of people not being served when they have crimes committed against them. And so there was just a lot of reasons for people to really want a push to spend money on preventative measures, on things that help people find wellness instead of criminalizing their attempts to survive. Unfortunately, in the end, despite this genuine outcry to defund and to shift at least a tiny percent of those funds to some other community services. The meeting a couple days later, which I have just a little clip at the end where you can see the, whatever you want to call it, the amendment fail because we just have a strong conservative bunch on our council who like to squish anything progressive and who absolutely refuse to hear us about statistics, studies, and research that literally says that policing does not improve safety. So despite all of that, I found it really motivating to see so many Londoners come out and speak in support of each other, in support of the community, and in support of what they believe in. So I thought maybe making this compilation could be motivating for other people, at the very least give you an idea that if you're someone who is more progressive in London, Ontario, despite our council not listening to you, your community hears you. We believe that the community should come first, that we should be funding things that help people, that protect people, that bring people wellness rather than just criminalizing them. And hopefully by watching this hour compilation, you can feel a little less alone in those thoughts and a little bit more bolstered in any activism that you choose to do moving forward. So yeah, if you have any comments, if you were there at the meeting, please share below. If you have differing opinions, if you're someone who agrees with funding the police, please feel free to also share that below. This is an open forum. I completely encourage open conversation. I do not allow hate, so you will be censored for that. But any other form of conversation is completely welcome, because the more we talk about this from differing views, the better outcomes we have, the more progressive outcomes we have. So here you go, an hour of London trying, begging, pleading with their council to defund the police. Enjoy.
London has the lowest growth among the 10 largest cities in Ontario in the crime severity index over the last decade, with the least amount of growth to the number of officers. They should be commended for that. Conversely, those police forces that have grown their resources have not seen a commensurate decline in their crime severity index. So despite these trends, in their own data, the LPS is requesting nearly 3 times the increase in budget year over year of any other municipality. It's a request simply at odds with their own data. Trimming even 5% of the LPS ask won't undermine their long-term plans, but it would indisputably bolster the critically important work being done by community organizations and programs and groups that are helping make a direct impact on the day-to-day safety, security, and well-being of the citizens of our city.
I would like to speak from the perspective of most of the people who chose to come to the rally outside of City Hall today. I am 18 years old. I have just entered the adult world. Some could say I have fresh eyes. I love London and I love the people in this city more than anything, but I see them suffering every day. The woman down the street with me with dementia, she begs for food at the end of her driveway in a nightgown because there are no mental health support workers who can support her, no personal support workers. I see kids that were at my high school that I graduated from last year struggling with homelessness. These small individual experiences reflect a greater image of London that I think has been pervasive for way too long. I am 18. I have been talking about these issues since I could talk. The general consensus from the people around me, my age up to like 90, every age, they are scared and they are unsure, and we have a government that we feel does not support us or advocate for the true rights of the people who live in this city. Council, I know it is not your intention to make us feel unsupported or unheard, but I believe it was last week, that meeting, I felt unheard and I felt unimportant and unprioritized to you. Council, I have a really specific, really important question for you. Starts with yes or no, and it ends with a lot more conversation. Do you believe that if given every resource that they need, every London citizen has the ability to be a good and productive member of society? Do you believe that? And if so, why are you not acting like it? Every single Londoner, especially the people in this room and in the overflow rooms, have the ability to be good, productive, impactful members of society, and they already are, but they are not being treated like that. And it's just, there is a disconnect. We are the voters. We are supposed to have the power, and you are supposed to reflect that power, and it is not being reflected. And I'm sorry, but in my entire 18 years of living, I have never seen an improvement or a change in that beyond people trying to save face and seem like they're being progressive. Just please act like the people in your city have the ability to be good and to make an impact and to have good lives given if they are given the resources. That's not being reflected right now.
They do not need a $492,000 armored vehicle, a second one that will sit next to our unused first one. To say that we have the type of crime that requires a tank is ludicrous on its face, no matter what data was cherry-picked to create the dangerous city scenario. We are not a dangerous city, and to say so is either purposely mendacious at worst or disingenuous at best. Due to the climate of fear created by such statements, important programs have lost funding for the sake of an unneeded tank. These are the very entities that help make London a vibrant city. A vibrant city is easier to police because in a vibrant city, the people own the streets, not the criminals. The ironic thing, if the $500,000 was spread around to the right organizations, this would help the police far more than any tank.
We haven't put prevention, education, support, things of those nature on the forefront. Instead, now we're doing Band-Aid solutions because we haven't prioritized community in the beginning. I'm concerned that more police means more arrests, more folks incarcerated, more folks being brought to hospitals, more folks being brought to shelters. From what I know from working in social services in our city for the last 20 years, these services are at capacity or well beyond capacity. So my question is, we can absolutely have more officers on the street, but what's next? A jail? We're gonna have to fund a jail because as I know, Exeter Road is already bursting at, it seems, at 200% capacity. So what are we gonna do with these folks that we are going to arrest? It makes no sense to me to put millions and millions of dollars into essentially nothing that will prevent any of this in the long run. It's just going to create more and more spending and more need for increased budgets and a police state. Furthermore, I am concerned for our community members who are people of color, who are Indigenous, who do not feel safe with the police. What does this say to them?
Consistently, the justification for the police budget has been grounded in language that promotes fear, arguing that increased police spending will decrease crime rates, making our cities safer. Many Black, Indigenous, racialized folks, women, members of the 2S LGBTQIA+ communities, unhoused folks, folks living in poverty, disabled folks, street-involved folks, and the many intersections of these communities who are most likely to experience violence and harm by the institution of policing have clearly shown support for the reallocation of funds to community-led supports and services. Both the police and city council have made commitments to address anti-Black racism, truth and reconciliation, and anti-oppression initiatives in our city. This budget, including the harmful rhetoric used to justify it, and its impact on the increased criminalization and harms of folks marginalized by systems of oppression, does not support these commitments. LPS has provided data that we are the third highest city for crime rates in comparison with the Big 12 in Ontario. The data not provided indicates that we are actually trending down in overall crime severity by 10%, violent crime is down by 15%, and nonviolent crime is down by 7%. We know marginalized folks are most at risk for police violence, criminalization, and not receiving help when they contact the police. So who exactly becomes more safe by increased policing in communities? Additionally, LPS receiving up to 10 mental health/addiction calls per day, with an average of 4 people being apprehended, should give us all pause to consider the layers of harm and trauma on folks already in crisis. We must prioritize properly funding the community-led supports we currently have, while also steadily building infrastructure that allows us to divert these types of calls away from the police. It's clear, to address calls for service and response time, you must address the myriad of things police currently respond to that they shouldn't, like mental health calls, by properly funding prevention initiatives that get to root causes. People often call the police because they don't have other options, not necessarily because it's their first choice. Criminalizing our community members is not the answer, nor is it effective in solving the problems. We have decades of data to support this. Instead of increasing the police budget, we must reallocate money to essential services, community and grassroots organizations, and community-led responses that meet people's basic needs, connect them to community, and provide a sense of belonging. If we properly fund and resource initiatives we already have, while implementing new infrastructure for additional non-police responses to complex calls best served by community-led response, we get to root causes and prevention with less expense and, most importantly, reduced harm for people most marginalized in our community. There are multiple items in the police budget that are wants, not needs. The state-of-the-art joint training unit, at a cost of $42 million for the first phase. The second armored vehicle, drones, another incident command vehicle, electric vehicles, body-worn camera and dashboard cams, and tasers for all officers. These items alone value approximately $50 million, are clearly wants, not needs.
30 seconds.
Thanks. Many of which contribute to increasing surveillance and militarization of the police.
No other business unit could raise such horrible issues as their response time,
their service, their employee disaffection as a support for more funding. We recognize from prior speakers that the crime index in cities doesn't fall with increasing members. I also noted that in 2023, the chief referenced the safe city, that London was on the index of the most dangerous cities. In 2024, can I update you? It no longer is. I am sickened. I am absolutely sickened. I woke up at 5 this morning saying, what else do I say? What do I say? I recognize how gently the chief of police said that the members were his sole concern, just like the unions. I see that the members are his sole concern. I don't see the community and the safety of the citizens who are marginalized and disaffected. I don't see them supported. I am devastated. I am sad for the future of my grandchildren. I can't contend with this. You hire more police officers, you ask for more funding because you say your officers are incompetent and need more training. What about the social worker, the social service worker, the librarian who feeds people, who gives them socks, the volunteers who support at no money the feeding of children, making sure they have milk instead of water, giving them some hope that tomorrow they might be alive? I beg you, I implore you, funding for municipalities is a fixed bag of funds. Taking a lot for police means we have a police state, not a community of people who collectively care for each other.
This is a painfully huge budget, and I sincerely hoped that the police board and their finance team would take the opportunity and the feedback they received to find some areas to trim. As someone who puts together annual budgets, I know it's not easy, but it is always possible. Always. They could have looked like heroes. Instead, I feel like they have us in a chokehold, forcing their budget down our throats while reaching deep into our pockets to pay for it. The message that the London Police Association posted on Twitter or X or whatever on January 29th endorsing the proposed police budget was shameful, to say the least. And I believe in direct conflict to page 2 of the mayor's budget that Mayor Morgan specifically drew attention to, the steps towards anti-racism and anti-oppression at the City of London. During the February 15th budget meeting session, Mayor Morgan said, quote, that the London Public Library won't cease to exist if we don't give them exactly what they're asked for, end quote. Doesn't that also apply to the police?
House the homeless instead of funding cops. Address climate change instead of funding cops. Provide mental health resources instead of funding cops. House the homeless instead of funding cops. Address climate change instead of funding cops. Provide mental health resources instead of funding cops. House the homeless instead of funding cops. And instead of funding cops, maybe address climate change. Instead of funding cops, maybe you could provide mental health resources that aren't there or are inadequate. I speak from experience, by the way. Maybe even fund the library. That would be nice. You know, there's just so many options. Like, instead of funding cops, you could do so much, you know, 672 million. Baby, I can't even pay my rent. Like, that's a lot, you know? Or fund the cops less, at least. Give them something. Give them like a house. That would be nice. Provide mental health resources instead of funding cops so that people like me don't die. Because the mental health resources that are currently there have failed me.
Feelings are not a good guide for action. And if the London Police Services wants to try to inspire fear in the citizens of London, we should not take that as a good guide for action. We should use good data. And I have a study in my hand from Seabrook et al. I've emailed you a link to a copy of this. It's published by the University of Toronto Press through the Journal of Canadian Public Policy. I'll read you the title and just one line from it. Police funding and crime rates in 20 of Canada's largest municipalities, a longitudinal study by Seabrook et al. No consistent associations were found between police funding and crime rates across municipalities, and overall net increases in spending per capita are not associated with greater net decreases in crime rates. So when the London Police Services tells you that we need to increase funding by 30%, there is no good data to justify this conclusion. Please understand that it is not too late to say no. Hamilton City Council said no to the police budget. They sent it back. It was reduced. Toronto City Council also sent back the police budget. and it was reduced. It is not too late for London City Council to listen to the constituents of London and ask for the budget to be sent back. It is not justified by good data.
The syllogism that we need more funding for policing to prevent crime is fallacious because it doesn't address the root cause of crime. And part of that root cause is rampant economic inequality. People are pushed to commit crimes when you literally extricate from them their basic rights to shelter and housing. And the reality is that petty crime is just the crime police choose to deal with, instead of immoral acts that go unnoticed and permitted because they are not committed by people of a lower income, but instead by people on the Sunshine List. The speaker before me who skipped me had seemingly valid reasons for wanting more funding for police officers. He was concerned about his wife and his own belongings, about people breaking into their car. But the fact is that police officers often don't even come for those crimes until the next day or at all. They don't prioritize the real needs of members of our community. As that guy said, police officers are sitting around in their car eating donuts, and sadly his call for more funding to them won't change that. The London Police Department wants to pretend that there is rampant, more serious crime they must address, and that their already enormous budget is insufficient for that. However, that's a veneer for the fact that those funds are likely going towards fleet upgrades, body cams they will often turn off, and a light armored vehicle, which is especially ludicrous considering it would glorify General Dynamics, who have been unjustly exporting those light armored vehicles to Saudi Arabia. The reality is that fixing the issue of homelessness would largely eliminate much of the work police do, and providing housing would do that much better than funding those police who disproportionately target BIPOC, people with mental health concerns, and our most vulnerable populations who would feel much safer with community-oriented solutions.
I do resent having to pay more than I think is necessary because of a lopsided process that has devalued the broader needs of this community and created an atmosphere in which criticism of the bloated police budget request is viewed as sacrilegious. I know that more officers, training, and equipment do not come cheap, but is there any budget proposal that cannot be trimmed just slightly? How about 1%, 0.5%, or even 0.07%? I am at a loss to understand why certain councillors don't think that other underfunded organizations need what they have requested, but the police need every dime. 1% of $672 million, the police budget request, is $6.72 million. I think of how that could be used by our libraries, the performing arts and museums, cultural entities that bring people to our city, especially to the downtown, where their presence acts as a natural and enlightened deterrent to crime. It troubles me to think that some city councillors are afraid that the police would appeal any amendments to the province. And I wonder, why are they so intimidated by a legitimate part of the process? But it troubles me more to see how much easier it has been for city council to take from those who haven't political clout or strong unions or any mechanism to appeal their decision.
The London Public Library has a proposed budget increase of $332,000 in 2024, which is $267,000 less than the amount that LPS will be spending on furniture and equipment alone in the same year. In the London Free Press, Mayor Josh Morgan talks about resources being allocated in this budget. He said, quote, "We're not going to be able to do all of it. Where do you want to see us make those maintenance investments or those new investments in our city?" End quote. I'm here to make it known that I want my tax-paying dollars to go towards helping those who are being displaced, not to those doing the displacement. Just yesterday, a man who crossed the street to ask me and my partner for help seemed so incredibly desperate for any kind of support that I frankly couldn't give him. I don't have the power to do that, but this council absolutely does. What kind of progress could be made in this city if we invested money into the people and the resources that support them? Fund community care over police all day, every day.
I called to make a missing person report for my son, and the officer on the phone became ignorant, became belligerent, became belittling, and then he didn't want to talk to me anymore. So I stopped talking, and I said, "You're not going to do a police report, are you? A missing person report?" He said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because I don't feel your son is missing." I said, "I didn't ask for your feeling, and I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked to make a police a report of a missing persons." Well, I'm not doing that. I then called Toronto Metro Police, and I talked to them. They made a missing report for me. They did some investigation. They have been in touch with me. Luckily, I do have someone did call me from missing persons, and we set up another one here in London. But it's pretty sad that I had to go to Toronto to get them to notify London. So when it comes to the budget, and I hear about their wonderful little, their new toy truck that they want to buy, that service was not there for me. That service was not provided. And I believe it says right on their cards, to serve. Well, I certainly wasn't served. And to this day, my son is still missing. I have yet to hear anything back from the London Police Services about any progress, any searches, anything.
Immediately before I worked with the city, I worked at the city's only graduated housing support program run by the ARC. One such client you may know, her name was Jessica Beecham. She had received support from us, completed rehab, and had left our housing support program to live independently in Woodstock, but to my understanding, through the failings and negligence of the London Police Services and other community supports, she died. Her body was found in the Thames River at Ivy Park on July 20th, 2022. May she rest in peace. In a CBC News article, her death was quoted as being emblematic of our failure as a city. A significant portion of police calls are about the local homeless people's sometimes erratic behavior, and in most cases, there was literally nothing LPS could do unless the person was posing a serious threat, which was rather rare. Such was the case with Jessica Beecham. They didn't want to deal with her, so they took their time showing up when calls were made about her or for her, as was revealed in a London Free Press article. LPS has harassed and harmed many activists in this community over the last decade, some of whom I know personally, and in some cases that I have witnessed. I've personally written to the Office of the Independent Police Review Board about LPS and their conduct, unfortunately to no avail. Go figure, as it's run by retired police officers. What I can tell you with absolute certainty is that the last thing London needs is more police and more money being poured into the surveillance and harm of its citizens via our police. Taking resources away from the most destitute populations who need them the most and then policing those populations isn't going to help anyone, and it isn't going to help the city. It didn't help Jessica and it didn't help Gary. To reiterate what others have said, all research and successful drug policies show that treatment should be increased and law enforcement decreased while abolishing mandatory minimum sentences. I call for the City of London to defund the LPS and reallocate our funds to non-policing forms of public safety and community support, including social services, youth services, housing, education, healthcare, and other community resources.
What I would like to talk to you about today is the protests that have happened in the past couple of years. And just because they aren't recently related to the multi-year budget, I don't think they should be discounted. We have the climate action protests, which saw over 3,000 Londoners gather in the streets in 2019. We saw the Black Lives Matter protest with around 10,000 people in 2020. And we're seeing today the Free Palestinian protests, as well as Care Over Cops, which the rally happens today out front. We're not asking for more police. The youth are asking for a sustainable and equitable future, many of which are calling for defunding of the police as well. We should be looking at what the public wants, what the public stands by. Advocacy is hard. We have jobs and families and extracurriculars in school. Coming to a participation meeting, emailing your counselor takes a lot of work, and putting these protests together and showing up to these protests are really important and take a lot of time from people. And seeing these large numbers of people march in the streets, you know that's what London wants you to support.
The $672 million LPS budget increase is unprecedented, as you yourself, Josh Morgan, said, the largest of its kind in London history, much greater than many other city budget categories. You state within your budget that, quote, when compared to the 12 biggest cities in Canada, London is now the third most dangerous, without any citations. What does it mean for a city to be dangerous? Do you even consider what it actually means for residents to feel safe? What Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, what low-income people, the houseless, women, queer and trans people, disabled people, the previously incarcerated, what they all understand as safety? Because I know for a fact it is not police with weapons patrolling our streets like military men. But you need to understand that this budget proposal not only represents, but poses as a potential to more violence, more trauma, and a perpetuation of the ongoing genocide against Indigenous people. This budget proposal, and frankly, any type of police reform, cannot possibly make our communities safer. The London Police Service budget amendments tell a false narrative that conducted energy weapons save lives and reduce injuries, that tasers give police the ability to de-escalate many volatile situations. How can pointing a weapon at the member of the public possibly be a form of de-escalation? How can the threat of harm possibly keep the public safe? Who in the public are you actually trying to keep safe? Because to me, it is blatantly obvious who you're failing. $2.6 million for body-worn cameras, supposedly a means of promoting transparency, accountability, and fairness. There is no factual evidence that supports Canada's promise that BWCs have reduced crime. They are shown to be ineffective in reducing police brutality. Police have the power and discretion to turn on or off their BWCs whenever they like, and they have control over the footage. You know what BWCs actually are effective at? Increasing surveillance. $500,000 in a new light armored vehicle. The LPS already has 2 LAVs donated to them by General Dynamics, the same General Dynamics that is funneling weapons and supplies to the Israel occupation forces to enact their genocide against Palestinians. But these vehicles are hardly used, often once, twice, or no times throughout the year. The reality is that these vehicles are largely used for public relations, at events and at schools, so that police can lie and tell the children that having these militarized weapons keep them safe. When you militarize the police in these subtle ways, it makes that militarization normal. It's the lie of the thin blue line. We know in reality there are layers of services that actually protect the public and prevent these situations, not just react to them. We see that in 2022, 99.5% of LPS's costs of police budget went towards personnel costs. Police make more and our cities stay poor. Your 6-figure income is a boot on the neck of the poor and the working class. Your lack of urgency and effective measures to address the houseless crisis and combat systemic oppression disgusts me.
In general, we do have a history of underinvestment in the city due to tax freezes in the past. And if there is a concern about affordability for homeowners on fixed incomes, then the police budget is one of the very few places where reductions can happen without losing direct support to someone's life. Boards, agencies, commissions like the transit and library have been told, tighten your budget, seek other funding, come back with the better plan. The police are just as capable of seeking out alternative funding and have said as much to this body. This council can demonstrate that the police are subject to the same budget scrutiny that others are. If a difference of a tax hike between 8.7 and 8.8% is enough to reject support for other emergency social services, let me suggest offsetting that with a mere 5% reduction to the increase of the current police budget. That is less than a 1% cut to the entire budget. So for those who would like to be fiscally conservative, you can do this without treating the police budget as untouchable.
We all get in the press, you know, cops protect private property over personal property. It's moving backwards. We're always gutting the system. We're always scraping the guts out from this bullshit. And I feel like this is a pretty pivotal point and a lot of pivotal income to be like, you know what? How about we assess this, represent the views in the community, and actually make a decision that ain't a waste of $673 million? That's a big ass number. I can't add that high. I don't make that much money, but I feel like a lot of that could go to more beneficial services, and we could all just come up.
I will be mentioning some things that will be upsetting to other sexual assault victims if they're present. When I was 13, I was sexually assaulted by a classmate for over a year. I was followed home and cybered attacked for another year preceding. Your police sighed at me when I told them I was too scared to talk about what I had just been through. When I was 15 years old, I was flashed in the alleyway by my house. When my mom called the police, the first question they asked me after my address wasn't how it happened or if I was hurt. An LPD officer asked me to describe what the flasher's genitals looked like. How would that help? Is that how the LPD identifies the people that they take in? When I said I didn't want to think about it, she kept pushing me. I didn't want to contact the police in the first place because I was afraid the situation would escalate, because that's all the police can do. Countless officers in the LPD are facing sexual assault allegations at the moment. And instead of being fired or charged, they're being put on paid leave. They're paying to cover up their countless crimes. This is where your $673 million request will be going. I want you to think about the countless amount of houseless children and adults facing sexual assault and rape, being abused by the same officers that are requesting $673 billion for their violent weapons, armored cars, and their donut fund. I have seen outside of St. Joseph's Cafe, a man passed out on the ground from opioid overdose. 2 cops approached him, asked if he was awake, And when he didn't answer, they walked away. A member of the London Inter-Community Health Center came out and gave him medication in his nose and called an ambulance. This was 2 years ago, and clearly nothing has changed. Some people here have complained about crime, but they don't think about what leads to it. The criminals that you speak of are cold and starving. They have children who are hungry and freezing. They wouldn't be stealing if it wasn't their very last option. Don't act like you care about the people on the street if you're not willing to fund the programs that will help them. Don't act like you care about sexual assault victims if you're willing to pay for the cover-up of the people abusing them. Don't act like you care about the people of color and Indigenous folks in our city if you're willing to ignore the abuse and violence that they face that is perpetrated by our police. I believe in prevention. I believe in a better London where the people on the street are given help and sympathy. This is achievable, provided you support housing initiatives,
20
safer
seconds.
supply programs, safe injection sites, accessible education, and transit. When you're hurting, the police will not help you. It has been proven time and time again.
I echo my neighbors in demanding the council reject the London Police Services budget and instead allocate funds towards evidence-based health and community services that are proven to actually reduce crime and increase well-being. I am extremely alarmed by the council's apparent disregard for the documented ineffective and harmful behavior of several London police officers. Ongoing occurrences of misconduct, particularly targeting those that need the most help, as well as violent and blatant anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism, ought to matter to you and to budget considerations, especially as a council who claims to be committed to anti-racism and reconciliation. A long reputation of corruption, delayed response or even denial in sexual assault cases, overuse of force even causing death, and submitting a budget request with skewed statistics should at the very least give you all pause. Your willingness to financially support this behavior communicates that you shrug away the rampant racism, discrimination, misogyny, and bigotry displayed by this police force. Document assaults not only take place on our city streets against our most vulnerable and marginalized folks, they also happen within police custody, with no checks and balances, because their institutional culture is so psychologically unsafe that fellow officers would risk their own safety if they speak out. Police misconduct with impunity or paid leave is unacceptable. This crime needs to be reduced. The incompetence of LPS as an institution stems not from a lack of resources, but from a lack of accountability and a failure of the city to invest instead in alternative models of intervention. LPS has an increasing gap in education and skills in trauma-informed response and nonviolent intervention. There is a total absence of critical thinking and awareness of the role of police in perpetuating crime and systemic injustice. Why wouldn't we prioritize funding the services that can offer adequate prevention and can effectively and safely de-escalate and get folks access to the care they need so we can address the root causes of suffering and the root causes of crime? Adding more of these status quo officers to our streets with more weaponry and continued freedom to perpetuate harm does not make me feel more safe, protected, nor served. Less than a year ago, London was named Canada's unhappiest city. We are not okay. We're grappling with financial distress, health and housing crises, discrimination and underfunded community support services. We're struggling. The unequivocal support of a harmfully ignorant police force sounds a lot like no red lines for a genocidal military. The term dystopia is no longer a distant concept, but a harsh reality reflected in part by militarizing our cities through swelled police power. Do not dismiss the voices of those calling for change. There is desperation here. As folks continue to struggle, protests and expressions of dissent will continue to grow. We know it's no coincidence that we're seeing more intimidation tactics and weaponry and increased misuse of force against peaceful protesters, with continued disproportionate harm for those with equity-deserving identities. The egregious budget LPS has proposed will not lead to increased safety. It will lead to increased desperation that we cannot afford. That is dangerous for everyone. If you approve this LPS budget as submitted, you will put us all at risk. We do not need more fear, we need more support.
Criminality exists as a consequence of poverty, and an increase in the police budget of any kind, let alone the increase that is proposed, won't solve poverty, it will simply criminalize it. An increase in the police budget will simply make the existence of the houseless and marginalized of society more dangerous. It will not end houselessness, but further brutalize and displace those who have nowhere else to go. My fellow friends who stand against this police budget have already stated where this money could go, literally anywhere else. The cops do not need it. The community does.
The police budget has contributed far too much to our ballooning tax rate. We, as citizens, do not agree with the amount of money you are giving them. If the library should have to find more areas for savings in its base budget requests, despite experiencing the same or worse chronic underfunding as the police department, then why shouldn't the police department also have to find areas for further savings too? The library does more for our community and many people's sense of safety than any armed police vehicle or training facility ever could. It is clear from past meetings that councillors have ideas as to where some of these savings can be found. So stop asking the deputy chief if he is willing to take cuts and simply tell him to find savings the same way you told the CEO of the library.
There's a name I want the council to remember when they consider this new budget. That name is Wesley Reeves. He's one of the dozen of cops' names that come up from the last decade if you Google London, Ontario, paid suspended officer for years. The police of this town have wasted an undisclosed amount of dollars in the last few years paying people who do not work for them. In any other industry, this would cause outrage. If the school is doing this or the hospital is doing this, you would throw a fit. The police as a public service cannot be held to a different standard. Let me appeal to you. If you have a kid and that kid has a Barbie dream house and doesn't use it, you wouldn't buy them a second one. If that kid had 2 Barbie dream houses and didn't use it, you sure as hell would not give them a 3rd one. And yet the London police are asking for a 3rd lightly armored vehicle when they don't even use the first 2. I urge the council to say no to this budget increase. The London police do not deserve more money when they can't even properly use the funding they have. The budget the London police want is too large for London to maintain in the long run. A vast majority of it is going to items to only boost the London police's ego and the ability to escalate peaceful situations into violent arrests. Once again, usually against people of color.
I live off of Richmond Row. I don't feel unsafe. I don't always call the police because there's nothing they can do. I recently had a car towed off my property that ended up being stolen. I did call the police. They basically just shrugged their shoulders. I don't support this police budget. I think it's a greedy budget. I think the police and members of council have shown ill will to Londoners. Some councillors just won't talk about the debate. They vote against motions that want to redirect some of that money to other service areas. They reject it in silence. There's been no debate, and I find that rude. And I don't want my money squandered just because the police is the new flavor in this budget. You have to deal with homelessness going through many, many years. It's a chronic, systematic problem. You don't get to switch it out after 4 years because you have a new police chief. And I think that you can't hold the police to account. You can't follow up on the police budget to make sure those promises are coming through because you can't even ask them to go back and find savings. It's misleading to tell your constituents that unless they get $700 million in 4 years, that somehow they're going to be unsafe. That's a lie.
So we supposedly live in a facts over feelings society. That's what people want. They keep talking about facts over feelings. So why are people ignoring the facts simply because they feel loyal to an entity that doesn't give a shit about them? Not enough data or feedback has been conducted for us to say that this is what the London community wants. Unhoused people, disabled people, queer people, racialized people, poor and working class people are not served by an increased police budget. Only the protection of private property is, and maybe a minority affluent population. Speaking to what one of the police board members shared, who shouldn't have been allowed to speak as they are not a member of the public, they said that this was the most thorough process they've ever conducted. And I just want to say, if that is true, I am concerned. Every single point in that budget can be debunked. The research is there, the stats are there, and I'm not going to go over all of them again because you should be thinking critically about this and you should be able to do that research on your own, and many people have laid it out already. Here is some stats though, which someone else pointed out, was that London was ranked the unhappiest city in Canada. Why? What could have caused this? Is it because we're so upset that another LPS officer isn't on the sunshine list? Or maybe it's the looming threat of poverty and houselessness. Maybe it's the feeling that the system we live under doesn't care about us. The society that we live in is criminogenic. This means that the conditions we live under encourage and produce crime. Increasing policing is not going to solve this issue. It's also an insult for the LPS to talk about EDI and anti-racism, and then also slander racialized people speaking out against the police budget. If you truly want to reduce crime, you need to invest in community care. Our unhoused people are taking refuge in libraries. It is shameful that they are being left on the streets and have to find shelter because we also criminalize their houselessness. My trust is not in the police, and especially not in a police force too incompetent to come up with a reasonable budget. Why should we trust a police force that's intimidating our own city council? Are we just gonna continually let them bully us into giving them more money? Our city won't be safer by beefing up the LPS even more than they already are. I implore you to listen to the voices of the people who are speaking to you today. And I know this is annoying and I know we're dragging it on, but we can get a lot more annoying. We're not going away. If you approve this budget, we will continually advocate, and we will advocate year after year after year. This fight isn't over.
In 2023, I observed that there were many calls for accountability from some members on council for social service agencies, including some who made submissions to the Homeless Hubs process. In stark contrast, this round of multi-year police budgeting is being rammed through with insufficient interrogation by council. I and others are greatly dissatisfied with the lack of supporting evidence provided by the LPS to justify future expenditures that will account for almost 60% of our tax hikes over the next 4 years. If this tax hike passes without scrutiny, accountability, and reduction of the police budget, there will be renters who may get more policing, yes, but less housing stability. You cannot police your way to a better democracy, but you can enhance it with a well-funded library system. Some of the $672 million is supposed to go to building trust. How is this substantial increase going to prevent what happened to Deborah Christian or Caleb Joko? Trust can be strengthened for next to nothing by treating members of the Black and Indigenous community with dignity and respect. And then, only then, can we build from there. Our community is not under-policed. It is rather underserved. This present infrastructure gap, which I spoke about in my letter to council, being larger than national average for services such as the arts, culture, and recreation, prove that. The quest for accountability should be uniformly applied to each budget item.
Everyone here should be asking themselves, who will this keep safe? What does safety mean to you? What does safety mean to your community? What does safety mean to your loved ones, your friends, your family, your children? I am autistic. When I was still a child, my mother told me that I should keep a card in my wallet that says this. I am autistic. I struggle to communicate. I may go nonverbal in stressful situations. The reason she told me to do this was clear: the police. My mother feared for me, and the promise of protection from the police provides no solace, because they are the ones that caused her fears. My mother feared that my movements, my mannerisms, and the way I communicate would make me a target for the police. The protection that the police provides is only indicative of what an individual officer believes to be unsafe. I have seen it used many times as justification for the harm that they have caused. The police have instilled much more fear in me than the things that they are supposedly protecting me from. I do not feel unsafe as I pass by houseless people on the streets of London. They are my peers, they are my friends, they are valuable members of my community, and yet we have and continue to fail them. These are the people we should be helping, not policing. Where is the justice? Where is the protection that you speak of? The message is clear. People with money are more important to you than those without. The London police voiced their worry that people will lose hope. I fear that this is exactly what will happen if we allow them this budget increase. Fund the people, not the police. Thank you.
I heard a land acknowledgement at the beginning of this meeting, and I would like everyone to take the time to meaningfully reflect on what those words even mean in the context of the history of London, policing, and reconciliation. I think it would have been really important to frame your land acknowledgement, acknowledging that the tax money revenue that we're discussing on spending is generated on stolen Indigenous land. The sheer volume of people who wanted to participate tonight is remarkable to me and demonstrates that the mayor and London police, regardless of what was said earlier, did not do enough consultation with community or make meaningful engagement. I want to note that a counselor stated in a mass email sent to everyone that, let's be clear, Londoners are calling the police. This notion that Londoners would rather have mental health and social workers is not reflected in the number of calls for police. On an average day, there are 10 mental health addiction calls, and 4 of those result in apprehensions. This makes no sense to me because we actually shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back that 4 of 10 mental health addiction calls result in apprehension, considering that last year 80% of people in Ontario jails were actually legally innocent. And on top of that, we just had a death in EMDC and jails are overcrowded. So yeah, let's put people with
30
mental health and
seconds.
addiction in jails. London Care stats are that they received 3,661 calls last year, which equates to about 10 calls a day. And they show additional numbers of ways they've connected people to services. So I urge you to decrease the allocations to the police budget. And I urge you to hold LPS accountable to the outcomes they allege we will see. There's no data to support this. And I don't understand how we can continue to make decisions without data and evidence-based practices.
If you look at the shock doctrine by Naomi Klein, neoliberalism started in the 70s. So the main tenets were decrease social spending, decrease taxes, privatize and deregulate. It's made the rich richer and the poor poorer. It's like disaster capitalism. Throughout history, treating people with mental health issues, they've either gone to prison or they've gone to the health system. So it's kind of cycled, and I think it's related to funding. The more you fund police, the more it's used to criminalize poverty, mental illness, addiction, those kinds of things. One of the concerns I have is that if the mayor is on the police board, is that a conflict of interest? How does that work? Like, I think it's unfair that the police have somebody that can advocate for them. And did the message from Black Lives Matter resonate with people? How is it that if we think that we should take some of the resources from the police department and put it into frontline services and social workers and the rest, how is it that a police board increase of 30% passes? How is that not questioned and worked against? People are suffering. Ford took away rent control. There's 6,200 families waiting up to 10 years for housing. There's 2,000 homeless people. And we all deserve better. We've been victimized by greed over and over again. I saw a police officer giving a ticket to a homeless person. How is that money well spent? If you use a hammer on something and not use programs that heal people, you're going to get the result where they're traumatized and people have suffered enough.
All in all, people are struggling, tired, and desperate for support. With all of this in mind, it is baffling, alarming, and confusing to consider additional funding for the police and their toys instead of actual essential services. We want community spaces, third spaces where we can go, where we don't have to pay to exist, like libraries. This is what people need, not a police state. There are people dying on the streets, literally dying, freezing to death in the winter. And when you divert funding away from community services, essential needs like housing, we are saying it's okay. It's okay for people to die on the streets for no reason while the police get a new drone. The police don't need a new drone, they want one. Choosing to give the full $500 million to the police is more than anything else a moral failing. The most marginalized members of our community are crying out. Please listen to us.
Almost all of that $672 million can be put to much more effective use elsewhere. The London Police Association referred to citizens concerned about massive budget increases as radical zealots. Well, as a so-called radical zealot, I demand that the police budget does not get passed without further review, an in-depth review, I might add. I do not consent to my taxes paying for an increasingly militarized police force. I do not consent to my taxes paying for London to become another cop city. I do not consent to my taxes paying for shiny new toys and weapons for the police, while marginalized people in our city are disproportionately targeted, beaten, and criminalized simply for existing. I'd like to end by referencing the movie Legally Blonde, if you'd like to humor me. Housing, community supports, and public services will make people happy because their basic needs are met, and happy people whose basic needs are met don't commit crimes.
I also feel compelled to add my voice to the many Londoners here tonight declaring that the police budget is too big and needs to be sent back for reductions. The police budget is responsible for the majority of the property tax increase. All other business cases had some cuts. The police budgets should see a reduction as well. As a therapist, I can tell you that preventing crime through social services is more effective than policing. Strong social services make a city much safer than policing.
I saw one night there was minus 15 degrees. I saw a cop pulling down a tent of some homeless person. I went over to the cop and I said, "What the hell are you doing? This might be the thing that kills that person that night." And they took the thing away, the tent away. And I saw them left in destitution. What the hell am I supposed to do? So, you make this big budget increase, 8%. How many people are you going to put on the street? You're accountable for this. I see these people in desperation, and you guys are part of it because you'll fund the police that just oppress them. I'm more afraid of the police. The problem is our governments are not protecting us from the rich and the well-to-do. I heard that the French Revolution was caused by the rich, and I thought, what the heck is that all about? But they explained that the rich squeezed the poor so hard that the poor had to kill the rich to survive. We're getting close to that. Do you understand that? Do you want to help them? What are you going to do? You're going to turn around and just give the police more powers to oppress us more. We're sick of it all.
I also question the democratic integrity of the London Police Association and its sitting members with regards to its libelous statements against taxpayers who are asking questions about the proposed $672 million budget. I also question the appropriateness of my city councillor who remains sitting on the London Police Services Board while she is undergoing multiple investigations by the Integrity Commissioner. As a constituent and a taxpayer, I have zero faith in the so-called accountability of the LPS board. In an interview with the London Free Press, Police Chief Strong offered that mental health, addiction, and homelessness are the biggest challenges we believe our city faces. Then why are we not spending most of our tax dollars on those services? Why is the LPS demanding for the biggest line item in the proposed city budget at 18%, which is more than 8 times the proposed spend on community housing, for example? For the safety of the whole community and not just wealthy Londoners and business owners, we need housing, not guns, surveillance, or armored vehicles. The data concludes that if the basic needs of everyone in our communities are met, if we improve people's material conditions, that is when crime decreases. We need public resources, not armed police. LPS talks about their slow response time, but hold a protest outside McDonald's and you'll find officers on the scene within minutes. How curious. This budget approval process has been an illusion of democracy. Since my ward's public meeting on the city budget, I've been asking questions of my councillor, the mayor, Police Chief Trong, the LPS board, and LPS Media Services, and zero replies. You tell us democracy is engaging city officials and being part of the process, participating in meetings like this, but you're lying to us. You speak about transparency and accountability, and I have seen none. I have, and many of us are, bearing witness to your willing disregard for serious and important questions. To make London safe, we need community care, not militarization.
I need to talk about the fact that you are criminalizing people like me who diverge from the norm, and we see that. More and more people are seeing that. Let it be known that you claim to aim for equity, but you do exactly the opposite in your policy. You claim to be reconciliation-driven and make land acknowledgements, but you continue to enact genocidal violence on Indigenous community members via police violence, incarceration, and involvement in the child welfare system. Some of you like to performatively quote Malcolm X to signal your support for Black communities. But let me remind you, he stated that the biggest threat to the Black community was not the KKK, but white liberals who were willing to compromise on his liberation.
I worked in food security, and one day an unhoused woman arrived in desperate need of food and toiletries. They took everything, she told me. Her and her community were beaten and all of their means for life confiscated by the London City Police. All they had were tents in the forest. Yet the city would fund the continuation of these acts rather than the prevention by funding social services that empirically decrease crime rates. Please, turn Far East vacant buildings into social services and affordable housing. Don't modernize the weaponry used to displace unhoused and marginalized from them. Care Hubs received an average of 10 calls per day last year. Fund these, fund libraries, fund affordable housing, fund safe injection sites, fund care, not for cops, free Palestine.
I want to address some of the comments actually brought up by, I believe, the VP of the police board. Half of her speech was a red herring about addressing domestic violence and sexual violence through the police budget, ignoring the many excellent points and research brought up by many of my fellow neighbors today. First of all, how dare you use sexual violence and domestic violence to tug on our heartstrings like that's the bulk of the budget, ignoring all the other things that we've addressed. How dare you bring it up as if the police force isn't out there victim shaming, blaming, and committing these acts of violence on our marginalized population? Are you going to send 3 armored vehicles to protect these women? Are you going to taser their attackers? The reality is that the conviction rate for rape is 0.3 to 1.6% in Canada. That's why women don't report, as well as obviously other people. I'm saying women because that is what she mentioned in her speech. We heard tonight, many harrowing and vulnerable stories of sexual violence and how the police failed to protect us. So please stop acting like this $500 million is going to stop domestic violence or do anything to help it. Advocates of the police budget argue that this is for our safety. But what doesn't make me feel safe is a police force that gets a blank check with zero accountability for whatever budget line increase that they want, while our vital social services are depleted and have to fight for the tiniest little crumbs while under the most microscopic of scrutiny. I dare you to tell me with a straight face that that is fair. So it seems, counsel, to me that we do have the money for our social services. We are just grossly misallocating funds. It also seems very clear to me from today and the weeks leading up to this meeting that enough Londoners have objected to this egregious budget for it to at least be deferred, for our voices to be heard.
Those that are speaking in support of full support of the police budget are those who experience privilege every day, who have power every day. And those who are speaking against the full allocation of the budget are those who are experiencing marginalization and harm at the hands of the police. I'm very concerned that you're not listening to these voices, and I just want to urge you to really listen to the voices of the people who are deeply impacted by and who are losing their lives and their wellness every day because of the inequality of power. So just acknowledge the power and privilege that you all carry and listen to the voices of those that do not carry that.
We've heard the countless stories and harrowing stories of the crises people are in due to hunger, poverty, lack of affordable housing, yet we're still seeing LPS get more and more power to displace and abuse individuals, especially those of color, who are queer, who are indigenous, who are unhoused. What about the meetings that the LPS, the LPA, Mayor Morgan have behind closed doors? Is that not a conflict of interest? Is that not penal populism? What about the manufacturing of consent that's occurring? What about the LPS that's been using fear-mongering tactics so that they can justify tax increases that only they can afford? You have about 105 complaints as of 2022 for conduct complaints that I would hope are being looked into. If you even go on to the satisfaction levels of residents, police patrols, only about 50% of people actually want more street foot patrol. If you look at the OIPRD, the Office of Independent Police Review Director, most of the people who are in power are actually former police officers. I wonder if that's a conflict of interest. I think you can see why we don't trust this police increase or budget increase. So how does this help our community? I find it ironic that the slogan of LPS is deeds, not words, because so far I haven't seen any words nor deeds that justifies this budget increase. Free Palestine, thank you.
I was at the last PPM. I do have to say, quite frankly, this is all somewhat of a sham. We were here back then before the actual strong mayor budget was released. These PPMs are going through the motions. With all due respect, I think a lot of you have come in here with a view of how you're going to vote anyhow, and over the last 6 weeks, 5 weeks, you've discussed it and you've pretty much come up with your decision anyhow. So what I say, what others say, somewhat unimportant. You just don't listen. You really don't.
If you ever wonder why people are so disillusioned when it comes to politics and voter turnout is so low, I think that you should think back to this time. There are so many people that will lose their homes, access to food and safety because of your decisions, and you guys will continue to forward with the budget plan that's already in place. And it's upsetting to know that. I second the notion that this exorbitant increase in the police budget is a diversion of funds from the resources that benefit, provide for, and actually keep Londoners safe. more police will not create a safer city. Now, I actually used to be an employee at a pharmacy in London, and we called the police for every type of major crime almost. Narcotics fraud, assault with weapons, and grand larceny. Every time we called the police, we waited for hours, we wrote witness statements, and not one of these calls were fruitful. Not one report resulted in any charge being laid. Now, I volunteer for a national nonprofit organization that seeks to address gender-based violence in Canada, across Canada. We're at an AGM, London, Ontario was highlighted for how dangerous it is for women. Almost every major city in Canada was represented, and we, not Toronto, not Montreal, were highlighted. People in this room also had heard horror stories about women's experiences with the London Police Services. Like, this is like, it's nationally known that they are bad when it comes to violence against women. So you guys tote women when it comes to when you need to generate support and drum up, you know, fear about women being assaulted. But when it comes to the experience of women actually reporting domestic violence and sexual abuse and sexual assaults, they are diminished. They are treated as if they're the criminal. They are not believed, and they are subjected to a bureaucratic runaround. Now, the London Police, as I mentioned before, are famously soft on sexual crime. Most recently, the London Police failed to forward the Hockey Canada case. The police officers literally had video evidence of these assaults.
But it seems that people on the council, and from what I've heard, decisions already made, that this public report meeting is a sham, as other people have mentioned, that this is just to placate the illusion of democracy, that nothing that we can say here can change the decision that has already been made. So why are we here? What is this for? You should be ashamed. You should be really ashamed. Stop supporting and funding a colonial genocidal state of Israel and Free Palestine.
You're not making the city safer. You're just repeating these cycles of violence and trauma for both the most vulnerable people in this city and the people that you were supposedly helping, like small business owners, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Brian Michael Myers died on February 16th in hospital after he was found unresponsive in his cell at Elgin Middlesex Detention Center in London. He waited more than 6 months for a bail hearing in jail. That is the kind of thing that you were talking about when you were talking about giving the police more money. You are just talking about inflicting the same cycles of violence and not actually solving crime by funding housing and social services and everything else that people have talked about today.
We are the ones that keep us safe, not you. And all this talk about decorum tonight really annoys me because it is reasonable for people to be angry when they are suffering. It is reasonable for people to be upset. It is reasonable for people to not be able to control themselves emotionally when they are suffering consistently, and you do nothing. And then chastise us about decorum when we're suffering? That is nonsense and shameful. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. Decriminalize our survival. It's time. Thank you.
At the end of my letter to the Budget Committee, I expressed feeling a bit hopeless because it seems so clear that the committee had made up its mind for most of the committee. I don't feel as hopeless anymore because I've heard so many more voices than outside my own personal circle express dismay and express frustration with how this has been going on. I'm really tired, and I keep saying that because I've been here for like 5 hours now, and I came here right after work, and listening to this go on and on and on. I'm glad that I was here so I could hear arguments made that I've been wanting to make. And I'm really more hopeful now that those arguments will be heard and change can happen. I know that there's been lots of repetition at this meeting, but that's because so many people feel the exact same things. Even if we're sending you the exact same email over and over and over again, that's because we each resonate deeply with what that email contains. I want our voices to be heard, and I want to know that the council can hear our voices and address our concerns, answer our questions, and not continuously ignore us. Thank you. Good night, I guess.
Closing the vote, motion fails 6-9. Closing the vote, motion fails 7-8.